Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining our mostly weekly webinar series here at TeamOhana. I'm Virginia Hyland. I'm the head of solutions engineering here at TeamOhana, and I'm excited to take you through a demo of the platform today and specifically talk about and focus on how we work alongside Workday position management to really simplify and streamline the process. For those of you who are familiar with working with Workday position management, I'm sure you've seen all types of iterations of how position management is used at the different organizations you've worked at. And so we're excited to share with you today Team Ohana's perspective on the best ways that our most successful customers use position management. So with that, we're going to start just with the problem statement, what we've heard from our customers in terms of what the challenges they typically have with position management. And then we're going to hop into a demo of Team Ohana. So looking at our position dashboard within Team Ohana, what it looks like to request a new headcount and position, scenario planning, and then actually acting on the position and putting it through the hiring lifecycle. So how we integrate with your ATS as well. So let's hop in here because we have a lot to cover. And so we're going to start off by talking a little bit about where we see the problem with position management. Now, every customer that I've worked with uses this a little bit differently. And I think part of that is because of the challenges that come with using position management. So, in an ideal situation, you go through your annual planning process, your biannual planning process, and create all of your positions in Workday at that time. So these are all the positions that the business is forecasting to need for the year. For the most part, probably the majority of them are filled. Maybe if you're growing 10%, you have an additional 10% net new positions that need to be filled. And then throughout the year, you might add additional positions. You might want to change positions. And then, of course, you also are going to have some attrition, so need to backfill open positions. Now, this is not always the case because of the manual and rigid nature of creating positions and then the requisition that goes on top of it. I often encounter customers who don't create positions until they're actually ready to hire an opening. And one of the challenges with that is that if you're planning on hiring this head, but you don't create the position until you're ready to hire. So let's say beginning of the year, you say, okay, in Q3, I know I need to add 5 new engineers, but that doesn't live anywhere in any system until you're actually ready to hire in Q2, those 5 engineers. That's where you start to get a hiring plan that lives outside of Workday in a spreadsheet. So I'm sure many of you that are joining us today are probably maintaining not only your positions in Workday, but then also trying to keep a hiring tracker and a spreadsheet up to date, because this tends to become that master plan since not all positions are loaded into Workday. And then either way, regardless of what time the position is created in Workday, your next step is to create a rec off of that. And now requisitions are an interesting part of the Workday process. Really, the intention of a Workday requisition is meant to work with Workday's applicant tracking system. Similar to the way a job functions in Ashby and Greenhouse, the requisition in Workday is meant to be the object in which you hire candidates against in Workday's ATS. But oftentimes it's used, even when you're not using Workday ATS, as a placeholder for that requisition that will then be responsible for creating the job in Greenhouse or Ashby or Smart Recruiters, whatever ATS you're using. And what we've learned from talking to customers is that this requisition is very clunky to manage and create. So oftentimes you'll either get into a situation where hiring managers, if they are trained to create requisitions that go through an approval flow, they forget to request a requisition. They forget to update it. They don't want to log into Workday to use it. So then we also talk to a lot of folks who have a TA operations person or a recruiting ops person who's responsible for actually creating those requisitions in Workday. There's a ton of different fields that recruiting just naturally needs to fill out since the requisition links to the job. And so really we see a lot of the headache and heartburn around Workday position management falling on this requisition because it's really meant as a TA function. But if you're working in a tool like Greenhouse, Smart Recruiters, Ashby, even if you're working in Workday ATS, I've talked to many customers who still struggle to get widespread adoption of properly using that requisition. And then we follow along this process here and we think about you're working your way through the year. And a headcount plan is a live, living document where changes are happening all the time, especially for leaders of high volume hiring or high growth organizations. So that's commonly your head of engineering, your CRO, your head of sales. These are the folks who are constantly revisiting their headcount plan and doing what if modeling or scenario modeling to see how their plan is aligning to their business objectives. But if they're working in a tool like Workday Position Management, there's really no view for them to go and see what is my accurate list of open positions. And if I want to make a change, how is that going to impact my financial forecast? Do I have the budget in order to make this change? Or hey, didn't I make that change last week? And now the requisition is maybe representing that change, but the position isn't because it's locked. So definitely, I think when you think about position management, it's Workday in general is a tool designed for HR. So HR admins, HR users are tend to be very proficient users of Workday, but the business tends to be left out of that collaboration process. And so, yeah, that goes for what if planning. That goes for just one-off change requests as well. You decide that you need to up level a role, change a target start date, and so on. All of that gets clunky to manage in a requisition in Workday. And then the end result of that at the end there is you may have an integration. So once the candidate accepts an offer in your ATS, you can automatically create the worker in Workday and then close that position. Probably works maybe 80% of the time, but then you're also seeing a lot of failures because of the changes that have happened. You hired the candidate in a different location, you hired them at a different role than initially planned, but because the position wasn't accurately updated in Workday, now you're having a failure when you try to connect that worker to the correct position. Right? Lots of different people need to be involved in this plan, and yet they're all struggling to all have one single source of truth of what is the actual approved hiring plan. What positions can I hire now versus what positions can I hire in the future? So we talked a little bit about how the requisition is part of the problem here. The other way I help people think about this is thinking about the different systems involved in a typical HR tech stack and when it comes to headcount planning. You have Workday, which is your HRIS, that's your source of truth for all of your existing employees. That's managed and owned by HR. You have your ATS, whether that's Greenhouse, Ashby, and so on, managed and owned by talent acquisition. And then you might have an FP&A tool like Workday Adaptive or Pigment and so on. And that's managed and owned by finance. But these are all different systems owned by different teams, and none of them were really designed to talk to each other. And furthermore, there's no one place that was really designed for the business leader, the head of engineering, the head of sales, who really need to make those headcount planning decisions, all of the decisions around who to hire, when to hire them, where to hire them, what level to hire them at. Those really begin and end with the business leaders. And none of the systems that we've just looked at are really meant to built with them in mind. People whose their day-to-day job is not necessarily headcount planning, but it is an important part of what they do and the biggest line item in their budget. So where does TeamOhana come in? So I want to quickly go through the typical integration flow that we see for our customers who are integrating TeamOhana to Workday Position Management and talk to you a little bit about how TeamOhana really becomes that front door for all of the different teams to log in, manage their approved headcount and positions, and then how we then sync back with all of your different systems. And then I'll get into a demo to show you what that looks like live in the TeamOhana platform. So, at a high level, how Team Ohana solves this challenge that we've seen our customers have with Workday Position Management is we become your headcount planning front door. So, this means that every headcount decision that you're making at the company begins in Team Ohana with your hiring managers, your HR BPs, your finance BPs logging in to collaborate together on a hiring plan, and then putting all those headcount through an approval process which once approved can then create those positions in Workday and also load data back to whatever your FP&A tool is. So in this example, I have Anaplan here. And then you'll see later on in the demo, we break the process into two steps. So when you approve a headcount, that doesn't automatically mean you're ready to start hiring. You might take another month or three before you actually want to bring that role on board. So then we give TA the control to say, okay, here's our list of approved headcounts. Which one do we actually want to create as jobs and openings in Greenhouse in order to start acting on? All headcount requests, position requests begin in TeamOhana, and then as well as the plan changes like it inevitably does throughout the year, any changes that impact compensation will go through an approval flow in TeamOhana and then flow back to all the other systems. Now we do sync bidirectionally with your ATS. We'll get status updates if things are changing in your ATS as well. So for example, when an offer is sent and when an offer is accepted. And then I'll just put this. So this is really focusing on who's logging in to Team Ohana. And the answer is this is finally one single source of truth for everyone, HR and TA, hiring managers, and finance to all manage and work off of the same plan. This is just a bit more of a data flow view and how we typically would structure position management. Now, a key change that will typically happen, doesn't always have to happen, but our best recommendation is to get rid of Workday requisitions altogether. Like I mentioned before, they were really designed to work in the Workday ATS itself. But since Team Ohana integrates with Greenhouse, we integrate with Ashby. Greenhouse is actually a great customer of ours. The Workday requisition typically doesn't serve any purpose anymore. We take over the headcount approval workflow as well. And by removing that, you have a lot more flexibility to then directly manage your positions as well. So now you're no longer worrying about managing both positions and recs in Workday. You just have to worry about the position management, which is all handled with Team Ohana on the front end. And then we just integrate back. So anytime a new position is requested in Team Ohana, we'll create it in Workday. Similarly, a backfill, you'll just request a backfill off of an existing position. If you up level or down level that backfill, we'll update it in Workday. And then similarly, if any changes are requested at any point in time to any headcount in Team Ohana, we will then update the corresponding position. And then, yes, like I mentioned, we take over that integration to Greenhouse. So TA gets to decide when they're ready to push a new position to create the job and the opening in Greenhouse. The one piece that doesn't change here is if you already have an existing integration when a candidate accepts an offer in your ATS to create your worker and fill your position in Workday, that integration can remain as is. There's a few other things that we're pulling from Workday. We're pulling in your employee roster every 4 hours, as well as your job architecture. That allows us to automatically reconcile new hires, ensure that those workers are being created from your ATS integration, and also allows us to pull through your full job catalog. And you'll see what that experience looks like when I hop into the demo here. All right. So I'm starting off, we're in Team Ohana here, and I'm in my position management dashboard. This is a view that's commonly accessed mostly by HR to give you live visibility into all of your positions and their statuses. So here I can see my total positions, how many of them have been closed out, how many of them are filled. So all of these positions are being fed directly from Workday. All of these positions, sorry, are being fed directly from Workday. The 2,300 here that you see filled, these are all of your button seat employees. And then you have all of your open positions. So these are positions that are still open within the business. They're either vacated due to a termination or a transfer, or they have been created as part of your annual plan or your growth plans for the year. So Team Ohana really specializes on making sure that we're helping you prioritize and approve which positions are ready to actually begin recruiting and hiring. So if I come down and look at these open positions, within that, I can see the status of each of those positions. And so I can see which ones are hiring not planned. So this means that there's an open position in Workday, but no Team Ohana headcount has been approved to recruit against. You can think, so Team Ohana, in Team Ohana, we have the concept of a headcount. You can think of that as mapping one-to-one to a requisition. So in turn, it will also map one-to-one to a position. So every head that's approved to hire in Team Ohana will have its own unique Team Ohana headcount ID that corresponds to the appropriate position ID in Workday. Hiring not planned means that there is a position in Workday, but no headcount has been approved yet. So no plans to hire or backfill that position. Next, you have hiring not started. So you have approved the headcount, but you're not ready to start hiring. So based on headcount prioritization, TA capacity, the target start date for that new role, you haven't begun hiring. Hiring in progress means the headcount is actively being recruited for. It's linked to a job and an opening in your ATS. And then hired not started means the candidate has accepted an offer in the ATS. And then there's more detailed statuses here to delineate between whether or not the worker has also been set up in Workday or not. So already you can start to see how TeamOhana is giving you this one consolidated dashboard of what's happening across all of the positions in the organization. So at any given time, if someone asks how many positions do we have, open or not, you can come in and see that number here. Now, if you think about the perspective of a business leader, they don't also always necessarily want to think in terms of open and filled positions. They might just want to think of just their headcount in general and understanding where their current headcount is at and then where they're forecasted to go through to the end of the year. So that brings us into our headcount ledger view here, which gives us a breakdown again of all of our current button seat employees. So these would be our current filled positions. We've got a bit of a headcount walk here showing our joiners, our leavers, and then all of our open and approved headcount. So these are open approved heads, also meaning that there's an open approved position to hire against. And that's how we get to our total forecasted number of heads for the year. So I'm going to walk through now what the experience will look like for a hiring manager or department lead to request a new position. So very simple to do that. This is going to be, I'm just going to go through an example of a one-off headcount request here. So we simplify the form as much as possible, and this is going to be for a net new head. So I'm adding a new position to the business. If I was backfilling, then a lot of these details would be auto-populated just based on the position of the employee who we are backfilling for. But I could always go and make a change to any of these details if I needed to in order to accurately represent if I'm not doing a one-to-one backfill. So I'm going to go ahead and hire this director here. So if I'm a department head, I'll be automatically filtered to my correct department. I'll only have access to see headcount within my reporting line within that department. I will add a job title here. And then you'll see I've selected my job category and level, my role, and my department. And again, this all maps back to your job architecture in Workday, but we're simplifying this so that it's easy for a hiring manager to fill out. You'll see I haven't selected my location yet, so the system doesn't yet know what pay zone I'm working in. So my compensation is still 0. But once I go ahead and enter in what location I want to hire in, now we're pulling in the benchmark compensation directly from your architecture. So that's auto-populating, and you can see we have the full band here. And by default, we're just forecasting at the midpoint. From there, you can customize all the other details that need to be captured in this form. You'll see later on that when you go to create the job and opening in the ATS, there's a few other fields at that point in time that TA can fill out. This is how we simplify the process for hiring managers so that they can take the first pass at filling out a headcount form, and then it can take care of any of the other recruiting specific fields when it actually just comes time to hire. So from here, my headcount will go through an approval flow. Approval flows in TeamOhana are highly configurable, simpler to work with than a typical requisition approval flow that you might be familiar with in Workday. For example, I can have a different approval flow depending on if the headcount is private or not, depending on the type of role, the level it is, and the department, and so on. All right, so I'll enter my justification, set my prioritization, and then I'll put my headcount through a approval process. And now at this point in time, the first person in my approval process will get an email, and they'll also get a Slack notification that says that they have a new headcount to approve in TeamOhana. So I'll just pull up that Slack notification to show you what that looks like. Okay, so here's my Slack notification. So this is what that experience would look like. So if you think about it, you might have hiring managers who are actually doing headcount approvals just in Slack or in email today. So this makes it really easy for them to adopt a new tool because they can still do things directly from Slack. So here I can see Brendan requested a new headcount. I see all the details and then I can just approve it directly from Slack. Or if I need to view it back in TeamOhana, I can, or I can leave a comment directly from here as well. So once this headcount goes through an approval process, I'll just approve this on behalf of everyone. Once this headcount is approved, because in this workflow, we're creating a new position, now our sync with Workday is going to go through, and now we've created and linked back to that position in Workday. So now from here, because we're linked to Workday, if we want to make any changes to this role, again, it will go through an approval process and we'll update Workday as well. So for example, if I wanted to change this role from an M3, let's say I want to just change this role altogether. That will go through an approval process as well, and then the position will be updated accordingly. All right, I'm going to move into our recruiting workboard here so we see what happens next. So now we've just approved our headcount and it will come time to recruit. So let me pull up my environment here that's integrated to Greenhouse. So we're just following the life cycle of one headcount. I'll show you afterwards what it will look like if you want to do an annual plan or make bulk changes to a number of headcount at the same time. But following along here, I've just come into our recruiter workboard. So this is a TA lead or a TA ops view of the approved headcount plan. So here we have all of our open and approved headcount and they're linked to the positions. And here we have the breakdown of what stage of the hiring life cycle they're in. So every headcount, once it's approved, will start in a not started status. And then it will move into a ready to hire status once TA decides that they're ready to start recruiting for a particular role. Now, there's a number of different triggers that might trigger TA to go and mark a job as ready to hire. Your common triggers would be your target open date. One thing I didn't mention is when a headcount is requested, TeamOhana can actually recommend a target start date for you. So we look at historical hiring timelines for similar jobs in similar locations in order to recommend a target start date. And then based on that start date, we'll back calculate what the target open date of the rec should be. So target open date is an easy way for TA ops to filter, okay, which set of headcount do we need to begin hiring for next? And then prioritization is another way. So all these heads here are normal. Let me change one here to critical. So all these different ways of prioritizing heads to mark them as ready to hire. Our best customers have actually worked with their hiring managers to have them prioritize which are ready to hire. And then from there, TA are the only ones who can then create the job and opening in Greenhouse. So I'll go through an example here. So once you have marked your headcount ready to hire, let's go ahead and create that job in Greenhouse. And then just one quick note. So this 51 not started. The reason why this is so helpful is because a lot of people need to know what headcount have been planned and approved by finance, but aren't yet actively being recruited for. Even TA themselves needs to know because they need to be able to do recruiter capacity planning, but the business needs to know because they need to know what they've already planned, what's already in the plan for the back half of the year. If they need to change things around or make adjustments to their budget, they can't just be working off of what's actively being recruited. They need to know everything that will be coming up next as well. Okay, so let's go through the TA ops experience. So now I'm ready to create this job and begin recruiting in Greenhouse. So I can come on, I can assign a recruiter. That would send the recruiter a notification. So either the recruiter or the TA ops lead, just depending on your own process, will come in, they'll create the job in Greenhouse. We'll automatically populate a lot of these fields for you. So like I mentioned earlier, TeamOhana headcount is a very good like one-to-one replication of a requisition. So all the details you typically need, the location, the salary range, the job role, the job level, the target start date, and so on, that will all pull through from the headcount. But if there are other details, like if there's a job template that you need to link this job to in Greenhouse, or any other things that you want to wait until you're ready to hire for TA to fill out, they can fill that out in this form here. So we'll customize this form for you based on the data you want TA to capture in Greenhouse. So then I'll go ahead and create that job in Greenhouse. And this is also going to create an opening for me as well. So then if I come into Greenhouse, I can deep link right into Greenhouse. We can go into our job setup. So we can see I created this operations program manager role. And then if I go to see my job openings, you can see I've now created this opening ID on today's July 8th with our target start date in September and our job level 3. So this is, you can see here the opening ID in Greenhouse, the TOHA 409, maps back to what we just created in Greenhouse. So I've just gone back to that job that we created, our operations program manager, TOHA 409 is our headcount ID in TeamOhana, and that maps directly to our opening in Greenhouse here. So now I'm linked not only to the position in Workday, but also to my opening in Greenhouse. So if I were to make a change to, for example, to the target start date or this role, we would update both the position in Workday as well as the opening in Greenhouse. We've got 2 minutes left here, so I'm just going to quickly go into our scenarios here, and I'll pull up one that I'll go through what it looks like to create a scenario. So scenarios are very helpful, not something that Workday Position Management offers at all. And essentially, they allow you to take a live snapshot of your hiring plan, bring it into a sandbox environment, and play around and make changes and understand how those changes actually impact your forecasted spend and whether or not you have budget to do it. This is a view that is actually very self-serve by business leaders that typically, in order to do this type of what if analysis today, they would have to work very closely with their finance business partner. But with TeamOhana, finance can just set the total budget envelope at the beginning of the year, and then the business is free to manage it from there. So for example, I could add a new headcount to this plan. So maybe I just want to add another strategy manager here, and then I can recalculate to update what the total impact to my forecast is. I can down level a role and recalculate the impact to my forecast. I could see what it looks like if I change from a higher cost location to a lower cost location. And I can push out target start dates. Any types of changes a leader might want to make to their plan. We model all of that out and then show you whether or not it's a budget neutral change. We're going to keep track of all of these changes. Every headcount that we change, we can maintain a full audit trail. So if I come into these changes, we can see the 4 headcount that I modified, one that I down leveled the role, one that I moved locations, and then 2 where I changed the start date. And then based on all of that, that impacted the target base or the target impact for the fiscal year. All right, this is not only how you can model out changes, but also how the annual plan would typically be built. And then if in your business you'd prefer not to create all of the positions in Workday during your annual plan, you want to release, finance might want to release headcount quarterly, for example, you can leave all of those headcount in a draft status. So they won't be visible, they won't be workable on the live plan at all. TA won't be able to mark them as ready to hire. But then in that quarter that you are ready to begin hiring, you can come in, select all of your draft status, and request approval just for those headcount that they're ready to actually release to the business to decide when to hire. So this can also act as a staging ground for you if you don't want to create positions at the beginning of the year. All right, so that concludes our position management webinar. Hopefully, some of the challenges that come with position management resonated with you when it comes to all the managing day-to-day changes. Very hard to get hiring managers, business leaders working out of Workday. And oftentimes it falls on TA operations to manage a spreadsheet for them, as well as to manage positions directly in Workday. And hopefully you can see how TeamOhana can really become that front door and collaboration layer, empowering the leaders to make their own headcount decisions and giving them the tools that they need to make sure that they stay on budget. Feel free to check out our resources. There's a document in there that goes over our position or our thoughts on Workday management in more detail. And please join us for our webinar next week. Have a good day.